prescription, but with a betrayal that would echo through generations. In the frozen winter of 1943, on a blood-drenched beach in Sicily, where the sea turned crimson with American blood, a U.S. Army medic performed an act of mercy that was, in fact, a carefully designed military experiment. As German 88mm artillery shells screamed overhead, carving geysers of sand and flesh from the beach, he plunged a syringe of pure military-grade morphine into the thigh of a screaming young private from Youngstown, Ohio. The private's agonized shrieks ceased instantly. His body went limp against the wet sand. A beatific, almost divine smile spread across his face, a stark contrast to the hellscape surrounding him. He looked at the medic with pupils dilated to black pools and whispered, "I see God. Tell my mother I saw heaven." The medic, Corporal James Cobb, simply nodded, making a precise notation on his waterproof clipboard. He wasn't just saving a life, he was creating a customer for a system he didn't understand. This was the unspoken pact, the deal with the devil that would fuel a conspiracy stretching from the marble halls of Congress to the gleaming boardrooms of Big Pharma, a conspiracy that would claim millions of lives. And the architect of it all, a man who had tried to expose the truth, was found dead in a locked OSS interrogation room, a single morphine vial clutched in his hand, a room with no windows and a door that only locked from the outside. This is not a story about medicine. This is a story about the most successful weapon of mass destruction ever created. And you are still living in its shadow. Part 1. The Serpent in the Garden, 1803 to 1865. 1803, in the shadow of the Napoleonic Wars, in a small, cramped apothecary that smelled of dried herbs and chemical dreams, a 20-year-old apprentice named Friedrich Schurtener made a discovery that would change the human experience of pain forever. His hands, stained yellow and black from the sticky, raw opium gum, carefully isolated a white crystalline powder. He was not a wealthy man, not an academic, but a man possessed by a singular, burning idea. He tested it on stray dogs from the streets. The animals collapsed into a deep, death-like slumber from which some never woke. Emboldened by a scientist's dangerous curiosity, he tested it on himself and 3 of his teenage friends. The dose was miscalculated, too high by half. For 60 hours they hovered in the gray limbo between life and death, their hearts beating sluggishly, their breathing so shallow their families began to prepare for funerals. When Schurtener finally awoke, his first act was to name his near-lethal discovery. He called it morphium, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. He published a paper proclaiming it a gift to humanity, a safe alternative to unpredictable opium. But from that very first nearly fatal experiment, the compound carried a death sentence woven into its molecular structure. The serpent was born in the garden of human suffering. For the next 5 decades, morphine was the darling of the European and American elite, a fashionable solution to the vague dissatisfactions of a privileged life. It was sold in beautiful cobalt blue bottles, advertised in elegant magazines as a cure for the vapors, for melancholy, for female troubles. But its true purpose, its brutal destiny, was waiting for the perfect storm of industrial-scale violence. That storm was the American Civil War. The war was a slaughterhouse of unprecedented mechanical efficiency. The new Minié ball rifle round didn't just pierce flesh, it shattered bone into splinters, it mangled limbs into grotesque shapes. It turned young men into screaming, broken things. The sounds inside the field hospitals, the rasp of the bone saw, the thud of amputated limbs hitting the growing pile, the constant, low moan of dying men, was a sound from the deepest circles of hell. And then came the miracle, delivered in a polished leather case.
the hypodermic syringe. For the first time in human history, morphine could be injected directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the gut, delivering instant, profound, blissful relief. They called the resulting addiction the soldier's disease, a gentle, almost poetic term for the silent, creeping nightmare that swept through the ranks of both the blue and the gray, following them home to their farms and cities. But that term was a lie. A deliberate, calculated lie designed to hide a darker truth. The secret in the Surgeon General's office. Surgeon General William A. Hammond was a man of science, of progress, of ambition. He revolutionized the chaotic Army Medical Corps, bringing order and modern sanitation. But he also saw the reports that others dismissed as unfortunate side effects. The thousands of soldiers who, after their physical wounds had knitted together, would beg, steal, and lie for their next dose. They would sell their boots, their rifles, their wedding rings. A junior doctor, his hands still trembling from a 12-hour shift of amputations, his apron stiff with dried blood, brought Hammond a thick file. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and emotion, "the morphine. It's creating a dependency worse than any Confederate bullet. We are saving these men from death only to deliver them into a living damnation." Hammond took the file. He looked at the numbers, the casualty lists next to the supply requisitions for morphine, and he did something that made the junior doctor's blood run cold. He smiled. A thin, calculating smile. Because Hammond wasn't just a doctor, he was a strategist, a logistic in a time of chaos. And he saw what others, in their sentimental humanity, missed. A soldier addicted to morphine was a soldier who was docile, who was manageable, who would not desert his post because his very survival depended on the army institution that supplied his fix. In the cold calculus of war, addiction wasn't a tragic side effect, it was a feature, a tool of control, a means of ensuring a compliant, dependent fighting force. But the conspiracy went deeper, into the realm of pure greed. Hammond was in secret, coded correspondence with representatives of a German chemical company, eager to secure an exclusive, lucrative supply contract for the entire Union Army. He stood to make a personal fortune, a kickback on every grain of morphine that flowed into the veins of dying boys. He wasn't just creating obedient soldiers, he was creating a captive market that would last a lifetime, a generation of customers born in the crucible of war. This was the first dark twist in our story. The healer, the man in the white coat, was in fact a merchant of human misery. And his actions set a precedent, a brutal business model that would echo for a century.
Part 2. The Harvard Heist and the Birth of a Conspiracy, 1898 to 1910. Boston, 1898. The Gilded Age, a time of boundless American optimism. But Dr. Arthur Cobb was a man out of time, a skeptic in an age of faith in progress. While others saw a glorious new century of invention and industry, Cobb saw the ghosts of the last one, the human cost paid in blood and addiction. He was officially researching new nerve agents, but his real, secret passion was forensic medical history, uncovering the truths that powerful men buried. In this dusty, spider-webbed crate, donated anonymously by the ashamed family of the now disgraced Surgeon General Hammond, he expected to find dry administrative records, old supply invoices. Instead, his fingers closed around a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. The script was Hammond's, precise, arrogant, and unmistakable. They were not to fellow doctors or War Department officials. They were to executives at the German pharmaceutical giant Farbenfabriken Bayer. The language was not about healing or compassion. It was about market penetration, ensuring long-term patient loyalty through physiological dependence and the immense economic potential of chronic therapeutic regimens. Cobb's blood ran cold, his heart hammering against his ribs. He read a line, underlined in red ink, that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hammond had written, "The dependent patient is the most reliable source of revenue. His need transcends price. He is the ideal consumer." Cobb had stumbled upon the original sin of the American pharmaceutical industry, the smoking gun. He had irrefutable proof that one of the most powerful doctors in U.S. history had deliberately, knowingly, addicted tens of thousands of men for profit and control. He believed this truth, once revealed, would shatter the system, would force a reckoning. He was painfully, tragically naive. He took his findings to the Massachusetts Medical Society, expecting outrage, reform, a crusade for justice. The room of esteemed, gray-bearded doctors listened in stony, impenetrable silence. When he finished, there was no applause, no gasp of horror, only a thick, heavy quiet. Afterward, the Society's president, the kindly-looking, paternal Dr. Albright, took him aside in a wood-paneled antechamber that smelled of cigar smoke and old money. He didn't deny the evidence. He didn't get angry. He put a fatherly hand on Cobb's shoulder, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Arthur, you have a brilliant mind, a promising career ahead of you, a beautiful wife, a young son who looks up to you. Some truths," he said, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly, "are like a vial of nitroglycerin. Shaken too hard, they destroy the one holding them. Let this go. For the sake of your family, let this go." It wasn't advice, it was a threat, velvet-covered and delivered with a smile. The walls of the establishment were closing in, and they were not made of stone, but of flesh, influence, and silent complicity. Twist 1. The greater good, the government's hand. Shaken, but morally undeterred, Cobb dug deeper, following the trail from Hammond's era into his own. He made a discovery that was even more horrifying. Bayer, the same company in Hammond's letters, was on the verge of launching a new, revolutionary product onto the global market. They were marketing it with breathtaking audacity as a safe, non-addictive miracle substitute for morphine, a wonder drug to cure coughs in children, melancholy in housewives, and even, with cruel irony, morphine addiction itself. They had given it a heroic, powerful name designed to inspire trust and confidence. They called it heroin.
Cobb was horrified, his scientific mind reeling at the sheer predatory deception. He used his remaining grant money to acquire a sample from a European contact. He ran tests on laboratory animals. The results were worse than his worst nightmares. Heroin was not a cure. It was morphine's more potent, more seductive, more dangerously euphoric twin. It crossed the blood-brain barrier almost instantly, delivering a rush of bliss that made morphine feel sluggish. The crash was more devastating, the craving more immediate, the psychological prison more inescapable. He wrote a frantic, damning paper, a warning flare to the medical community, and submitted it to the Journal of the American Medical Association. The day after he dropped the manuscript in the mail, he received a visitor. The man was not a doctor. He was tall, clean-shaven, with perfectly combed hair and a suit that cost more than Cobb's furniture. He introduced himself as Mr. John Sterling, a special agent from the U.S. Treasury Department. He was polite, charming, and carried an air of quiet, absolute authority that was utterly terrifying. Mr. Sterling thanked Cobb for his patriotic diligence and his commitment to public health. And then, calmly, as if discussing the weather, he explained the real plan. The government, he said, was fully aware of the potential heroin problem. In fact, they were counting on it. They were going to allow the heroin epidemic to happen, to gestate and grow in the dark corners of American cities. They needed a crisis, a public outcry, a monster so terrifying, so visceral, that the American people would beg on their knees for the federal government to save them. That salvation, that massive expansion of federal power, would be the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914, a law that would give the Treasury Department unprecedented power to regulate, tax, and control every aspect of the drug trade, from the factory to the physician's pad. "Sometimes, doctor," Mr. Sterling said, his voice devoid of all emotion, his eyes as flat and dead as a shark's, "a controlled burn is necessary to prevent a wildfire. A few thousand addicts, a few broken families in the tenements, it is a small and frankly acceptable price to pay for the power to protect millions and secure the nation's future interests." Cobb was left speechless, his worldview shattered. They weren't trying to prevent the disaster. They were engineering it, cultivating human suffering as a political tool. This is twist number one. The government was not the solution. They were the silent, willing partners in the crime, the architects of the cage. Twist two, the betrayal, the knife in the back. Paralyzed by this revelation, drowning in a sea of institutional corruption, Cobb made a fatal human mistake. He confided in the one man he believed he could trust absolutely, his mentor and closest friend, Dr. Alastair Finch. Finch was a pillar of the Boston medical community, a man with a booming, infectious laugh, a generous heart, and eyes that twinkled with intellectual curiosity. He listened to Cobb's story, his face transforming into a mask of growing, righteous outrage. He slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses jump. "This is monstrous, Arthur, monstrous! It cannot stand!" Finch exclaimed, his voice trembling with what seemed like genuine fury. He offered to help, to be Cobb's shield and confidant. He suggested, with seeming wisdom, that Cobb give him the original Hammond letters and his explosive heroin research for safekeeping. "They wouldn't dare search my office or my home," Finch assured him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "My reputation is ironclad. I have too many powerful friends. The evidence will be safer with me." Relieved, his nerves frayed to breaking point, his hands trembling with spent adrenaline, Cobb agreed. It was a decision that would seal his fate.
The next morning, Cobb's world was utterly obliterated. His lab looked like a bomb had hit it. Every beaker, every flask was shattered into a million glittering pieces. His research notebooks were gone, every sample vial missing. The Hammond letters, his detailed heroin research, his verbatim notes from the meeting with Mr. Sterling, vanished without a trace. His heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm, he ran through the cold morning streets, his breath pluming in the air, to Finch's office. The door was locked. Peering through the frosted glass, he could see the office was empty. Not just for the day. Bare. The desk was gone. The bookshelves were stripped clean. It was as if Dr. Alastair Finch had never existed. And then he saw it. A single white rectangle on the floor, slipped under the door. He knelt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely pick it up. It was a carbon copy of a bank draft. The amount was $75,000, a king's ransom, more than Cobb would earn in 10 years. The payee, Dr. Alastair Finch. The issuer, the Bureau of Internal Revenue Special Projects Division. The memo line was a knife, expertly twisted in his heart. Consulting fee, opioid market stabilization, and whistleblower neutralization. His best friend, the man who had stood as best man at his wedding, who had held his son at the baptismal font, the man he had trusted with his life, and with the truth that could have saved hundreds of thousands. He was a paid informant, a mercenary of deception, a Judas in a three-piece suit, his price a government paycheck. Arthur Cobb didn't scream. He didn't cry out to the empty corridor. He simply leaned his forehead against the cold, unyielding glass of the door, the incriminating paper clutched in his whitened fist, and slid slowly to the floor. A man not just broken, but disassembled,
His trust, his career, his future all turned to dust in a single, brutal moment. This is twist number 2. The conspiracy was so deep, so insidious, it had co-opted the very concept of friendship, turning the most intimate trust into its most potent weapon. The darkest moment, the erasure of Arthur Cobb. What followed was a slow, meticulous, and merciless annihilation. Cobb was publicly disgraced in a coordinated smear campaign. Articles, planted by Finch's allies, appeared in prominent medical journals, questioning his sanity, his stability. They suggested his own secret morphinism had led to paranoid delusions and professional jealousy. His funding was revoked overnight. His medical license was suspended by a board whose chairman vacationed with Dr. Albright. His wife, Eleanor, unable to bear the social ostracization and the venomous whispers, left him, taking their 7-year-old son, James. The great, promising Dr. Arthur Cobb became a ghost in his own life, a cautionary tale whispered in medical school corridors. He lived in a single rented room in a South End boarding house, the walls stained with damp. His world shrunk to the 4 corners of his despair. He was surrounded by empty bottles and the ghost of his stolen work, a man haunted by a truth that cost him everything.
In the early hours of a cold March morning in 1923, a fire broke out in the boarding house. It started in Cobb's room. It was not a normal fire. It was an inferno, an unnatural blaze that burned hot enough to melt the window glass and twist the iron bed frame. The official report, rushed to print, called it a tragic accident, a tipped-over kerosene lamp, a predictable, pathetic end for a troubled addict. But the initial report from the first responder, a young, sharp-eyed beat cop named Michael Kyriakis, told a different story. He noted the peculiar chemical smell, not of kerosene, but of an accelerant. He found the door to Cobb's room, though cheap and flimsy, had been locked from the outside with a deadbolt that required a key. And amidst the ashes, half melted and twisted by the intense heat, he found a single distinctive object, a physician's ornate brass syringe case. He picked it up with his handkerchief. It was monogrammed with 2 elegant, unmistakable letters, A.F., Alistair Finch. His sergeant arrived, took one look at the evidence and shook his head. "Forget it, Mike," the sergeant said, his voice low and firm. "Some fires are better left to burn out. This one goes all the way to the top." But Kyriakis, a man with a stubborn streak of justice, didn't forget. He slipped the monogrammed case into his pocket, a tiny metallic seed of truth. He filed the official report as ordered, but he kept his private notes and the syringe case, hiding them away, waiting for a day when the world might be ready to listen. The truth was not just buried, it was cremated, and with it, the first major whistleblower of the pharmaceutical age was silenced forever, or so they thought. Part 3. The Protocol Ascendant, 1920 to 1945. With Cobb silenced, the blueprint was secure. The Hammond Playbook became the unofficial guide for the next century, an unspoken doctrine passed down among a select few in government and industry. Create the problem, sell the cure. When the cure becomes a bigger problem, use the public fear to seize more power and profit. The players changed, but the game remained the same. The morphine protocol had been formally born. Through World War I, World War II, and Korea, morphine flowed as freely as water. The government and the pharmaceutical companies had a symbiotic, unspoken relationship. They created the demand on the battlefield and then positioned themselves as the only solution for the pain that followed the soldiers home. The war on drugs wasn't a war on substances, it was a war on people, a war of social control, and it was a war that was designed to never end. Because a war that never ends is a business that never fails. Chapter: The New Keeper of the Faith, Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Alistair Finch, now wealthy and powerful beyond his dreams,
was the new head of the protocol in America, but the guilt was a cancer in his gut. He had not wanted this power. He had been coerced, blackmailed by Mr. Sterling over a long-buried medical mistake from his youth. Now he was trapped. He kept a private journal, locked in a safe behind a painting of a serene landscape. The entries were a chronicle of his damnation. He writes, December 12th, 1920. Met with the Prohibition directors. The model works perfectly. By restricting supply, we have created a black market 100 times more profitable than the legal one ever was. The protocol's influence grows. I am become a gatekeeper of misery, a warden of addiction. April 8th, 1928. The Bayer merger is complete. The Germans are back in the fold. Their research into synthetic opioids is alarming. They speak of a final solution to the pain problem. I fear what they mean. The ghost of Cobb visits me in my dreams. He was rich, he was powerful, and he was terrified. The monster he served had an insatiable appetite, and it was beginning to look beyond pain management towards something far more sinister, mind control.
Chapter: The OSS and the Ultimate Weapon. World War II. The Office of Strategic Services needed every tool at its disposal to defeat the Axis, and the morphine protocol had the ultimate tools, drugs that could shatter a man's will or make him pliable. "We need an edge, Doctor," Donovan said. "No charm, only cold demand. Truth serums, persuasion aids. We understand you have unique expertise in behavioral modification through chemistry." And so, the morphine protocol was folded into the nascent American intelligence apparatus. Project Chatter and later MK Ultra were born from its research. Finch, sickened but compliant, oversaw horrific experiments on unsuspecting subjects, soldiers, prisoners, mental patients, testing the limits of new, powerful opioids and psychoactive compounds. The goal, outlined in a classified memo, was to create a Manchurian candidate, a perfect, programmable asset, a man who would kill on command and forget he had ever done so. They were turning the painkiller into a weapon of espionage and a tool for psychological slavery. Chapter: The Heir's Return. James Cobb knew nothing of his father's torment. He had grown up with a different story, that his father Arthur was a weak-willed, shameful addict who had abandoned them. He had joined the army to escape that shadow, to be a different kind of man. He became a medic, driven by a desire to heal, to save. He was on a troop ship, heading towards the coast of Sicily, his stomach churning with a mix of fear and determination. He was going to save lives. He was going to be a hero, to erase the stain of his father's name. He had no idea he was sailing directly into the heart of the very system that had destroyed his family. Chapter: The Sicilian Test. The beach was hell. Sand churned into a bloody mist by machine gun fire. James Cobb crawled through it, his medical pack heavy on his back. He found a young private from Ohio, his leg a ruined mess of flesh and bones, screaming for his mother. "Hold on, soldier, I got you," James yelled over the din. He fumbled for his syringe of morphine, the same design his father had seen used at Antietam. He jabbed it into his private's thigh. The effect was instantaneous. The screaming stopped. The private's body went limp. A beatific smile spread across his face. He looked at James, his eyes wide with something beyond relief. "I see God," the private whispered. James felt a surge of power. He had wielded this miracle. He had brought peace to this hell. He marked an M on the private's forehead with a grease pencil
and moved on to the next wounded man. Unaware that he was an unwitting participant in the protocol's latest field assessment of battlefield efficacy, a study commissioned by Dr. Finch himself. He was a hero, yes, but a hero serving a hidden agenda, continuing a cycle his father had died trying to break. Chapter: The Locked Room. Finch's End. Back in Washington, Alistair Finch had seen the future, and it horrified him. The post-war world would give the protocol unlimited power. The research from the OSS was too dangerous. The plans for peacetime applications, social control, population management were a perversion of everything he had once believed in as a doctor. He made a decision. He would defect. He would expose the protocol. He spent a week gathering evidence, his journals, financial records, names of everyone involved, from Hammond to the present. He reduced it all to a single sheet of microfilm.
He was caught before he could make contact. They brought him to room 743. Miller was there, older, colder than Sterling, but with the same predator's eyes. "Such a pity, Alistair," the man said. "After all we've built." "You've built a nightmare," Finch spat, his voice trembling but firm. "The world is a nightmare, Doctor. We just provide the sedative." They forced a massive dose of pure morphine into his vein. As the darkness closed in, Finch used his last moments of consciousness to perform one final act of defiance. He slipped the microfilm from his sleeve and clenched it in his fist. Let them find it. Let someone, someday, understand. When Agent Robert Carter entered the room, he found the staged suicide, and he found the message in the dead man's hand. The conspiracy had claimed another life, but the truth, like morphine itself, had found a way to seep through the cracks. Carter pocketed the microfilm, just as Officer Kyriakis had pocketed the syringe case 20 years prior. The seeds of truth were being scattered, waiting for their moment to grow. Part 4. The Sackler Playbook, 1945-1995. The post-war era was a time of consolidation and modernization for the protocol. Its archives, Hammond's letters, Finch's journals, the OSS research, were not destroyed. They were digitized and stored on secure servers, a dark library of human manipulation. It was considered a strategic asset. In the 1950s, a brilliant, ruthless young man named Arthur Sackler was hired by a medical advertising firm with deep ties to the intelligence community. As part of a government contract to study mass persuasion, he was given limited access to this archive. Sackler wasn't repulsed by what he read, he was inspired. He saw in Hammond and Finch not monsters, but pioneers, visionaries. They had understood the fundamental principle. To sell a cure, you must first sell the disease. He studied the creation of soldier's disease, the marketing of heroin, the prohibition blueprint. He saw it all as a masterclass in market creation. He didn't just want to sell drugs, he wanted to sell need itself. He wrote in his own notes, "The key is to make the patient ask for the drug. The doctor must merely be the conduit." The 1980s and 90s. Arthur Sackler was gone, but his brothers, Raymond and Mortimer, now ran Purdue Pharma. They had the playbook. Using the protocol's deeply embedded influence, they helped fund and direct a pain management movement within medicine. They lobbied, they funded studies, they pushed the concept of pain as the fifth vital sign. Suddenly, every ache and twinge was pathologized. A massive, untapped market of potential patients was created overnight. The strategy was a direct, cynical lift from the past. Create the perception of a crisis, untreated pain, then position your product as the heroic solution. They used direct-to-consumer advertising, a tool Hammond could never have dreamed of, to make patients themselves demand the drugs from their doctors. The pressure from the bottom up was immense. The protocol's model had been updated for the television age. They were creating a new generation of dependent patients, just as Hammond had envisioned. Chapter: The Final Form. The launch of OxyContin in 1996 was the protocol's masterpiece. In internal Purdue Pharma meetings, the old language was used. When a researcher expressed concern about addiction, a senior executive,
A man whose father had been in the OSS shut him down. "Remember the Cobb containment protocol," the executive said, the term now a piece of corporate jargon. "Isolate, invalidate, terminate. We have the playbook. We know how this works."
The sales force was trained to aggressively dismiss concerns about OxyContin's abuse potential, citing its timed-release formula as a revolutionary barrier to addiction. They knew it was a lie. The Project Certner files on the corporate server, the digitized archive of their own dark history, contained the research showing that crushing the pill bypassed the time release, delivering a heroin-like high. They were selling heroin all over again, but this time with a patent, a doctor's prescription, and a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign. They had learned from every past mistake, every past exposure. They were perfecting the cycle. Chapter: The Whistleblower's Granddaughter. A low-level Purdue data analyst, a young woman named Anna Karyakis, was working late performing a routine server backup. Her grandfather, Michael, now a frail old man, had told her stories his whole life about the Cobb fire and the brass syringe case, urging her to look for the threads. On a secure, partitioned part of the server, she stumbled upon a directory labeled Project Certner. Curious, she used her admin credentials to bypass the firewall. She saw the Hamid letters. She saw the notes on the Cobb containment. She saw her own grandfather's name in a scanned, classified police report about the 1923 fire. The dots, separated by a century, began to connect in her mind, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. The monster wasn't just Purdue Pharma. It was a century-spanning hydra with tentacles in the FDA, the DEA, and Congress. She had found the source code, and she knew with a cold certainty that if she was discovered, she would suffer the same fate as Arthur Cobb. Part 5. The Reckoning, 1996 to present. Chapter: The Unraveling. Anna knew she couldn't fight this alone. She made copies of the entire Project Certner file. She encrypted them and sent them to a trusted friend with instructions to release them if anything happened to her. Then, using all the tradecraft her paranoid grandfather had taught her, she arranged a clandestine meeting with an investigative journalist from the Wall Street Journal. She handed over an external hard drive. "This isn't just about OxyContin. This is about everything. It goes back to the Civil War." The ghost of Arthur Cobb had found its voice in a new generation. Chapter: The Lawsuit. The Past on Trial. The lawsuits against Purdue Pharma were a tidal wave. During the discovery process, lawyers armed with Anna's anonymous tips forced their way into the deepest digital archives of the company. In a packed courtroom, a young lawyer held up a sheaf of papers. "I'd like to enter this as evidence. It is a letter from Union Surgeon General William Hammond dated 1863 to a German chemical executive." A Purdue executive on the stand stared blankly. I have no idea what that is." "Let me read a line," the lawyer said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The dependent patient is the most reliable source of revenue. His need transcends price." Does that sound like the corporate philosophy of Purdue Pharma? The courtroom erupted. The Project Certner files were entered into the public record. The century-long conspiracy from the cornfields of Antietam to the boardrooms of Stamford was laid bare for the world to see. The Hammond playbook was no longer a secret.
The final massive reveal was even more horrifying. As journalists and lawyers pieced together the Project Certner files, they found one last encrypted subfolder. It contained the personal journals of Dr. Alistair Finch. And in those journals, He named names, not just of the past, but of the present. He detailed how the protocol had not only influenced Purdue Pharma, but had also spun off into other companies, other drugs. It revealed that the protocol was not a relic. It was a living, breathing entity. It had funded the research for the very non-opioid painkillers and addiction treatments that were now being hailed as the solution to the opioid crisis. The conspiracy was not just creating the problem, it was also owning the cure. They were playing both sides, ensuring that no matter which way the pendulum swung, the money and the control would always end up in the same hands. The system was designed to be perpetually profitable. This was the ultimate twist. The fire department was also the arsonist. In a quiet retirement home, an old man named James Cobb watched the news coverage. He saw his father's face. A photograph from a university yearbook flashed on the screen. The report detailed his father's bravery, his pursuit of truth, and his brutal destruction at the hands of a conspiracy he called the Protocol. Tears streamed down the old man's face. For 60 years he had believed his father was a weak, shameful man, a failure. Now he understood. The demons that consumed his father were real. They were systematic. They were powerful. They had stolen his family from him. The medal he had won for bravery in Sicily felt like a lie. He had been a pawn for the very system that murdered his father. The story of morphine is the story of a broken promise. A promise that medicine would heal. A promise that power would protect. This painkiller, this angel of mercy, was from the very beginning a tool for control and profit. And the greatest secret it ever kept was the fact that the people in charge knew exactly what it was. The question this story leaves us with is not what did they know? The question is, what is the next epidemic waiting in plain sight? What is the next morphine being sold to us as a miracle, while the same old playbook is being executed in a new edition? And this time, will we have the courage to listen to the Arthur Cobbs and the Anna Kyriakis of the world while there is still time? Or will we once again wait for the bodies to pile up before we believe the truth?